What if we are not the first? Tonight, as you settle into the quiet darkness, let that question drift through your mind like smoke through ancient ruins. What if the story we tell ourselves about human civilization, that we are the pioneers, the first to build cities and decode the stars, is nothing more than a comforting fiction? What if, long before the first pyramid rose from Egyptian sands, long before the first cuneiform tablet was pressed into clay, another people walked this earth, a civilization so advanced, so complete, that when it vanished, it left behind only whispers in stone and shadows in our oldest myths? The idea feels impossible, doesn't it? We have mapped every continent, excavated countless sites, carbon dated our way back through millennia. Surely, if another civilization had existed, we would know. We would have found their cities, their tools, their bones. But what if we've been looking in all the wrong places? What if time itself has been their greatest eraser, and what we call prehistory is actually post-history? The long, slow recovery from a collapse so complete that it reset the human story entirely. Consider this. Our own industrial civilization has existed for barely 2 centuries. In geological terms, we are a heartbeat, a single breath in Earth's 4 billion year exhale. If our cities were abandoned tomorrow, how long would they last? Steel rusts, concrete crumbles, glass shatters. Within 1,000 years, nature would reclaim most of what we have built. Within 10,000, our greatest monuments would be little more than strange hills covered in forest. Within 100,000 years, almost nothing would remain except perhaps some curious isotopes in the soil and a thin layer of plastic in the rock record. Now imagine a civilization that rose and fell not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of years ago, or millions. What traces would survive such an immense passage of time? What evidence would we even know how to recognize? The question hangs in the air like incense in a forgotten temple, and as we begin to explore it, we find that the world is full of things that don't quite fit the story we've been told. Ancient myths that speak of golden ages and vanished peoples, archaeological anomalies that challenge our timelines, geological mysteries that hint at cycles of creation and destruction far older than human memory, scientific theories that suggest intelligence may have emerged on Earth long before we assumed possible. What if the myths were right all along? What if the stories our ancestors told around fires were not fantasies but memories, distorted by time, wrapped in metaphor, but carrying within them the echo of something real? What if we are not the first children of Earth, but the latest in a long line of civilizations that have risen, flourished, and fallen into the darkness of deep time? Tonight, we will follow that possibility wherever it leads. We will walk through the ruins of forgotten ages, listen to the whispers of ancient stones, and ask the questions that have haunted human imagination since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. Not alone in space, but alone in time. The whispers of deep memory. In the beginning, there were the stories. Long before archaeologists with their careful brushes and measuring tools, long before carbon dating and stratigraphic analysis, there were the myths. Every culture on Earth, no matter how isolated, no matter how different their languages or customs, tells variations of the same haunting tale. Once, long ago, there was a golden age, a time when the world was different, when beings of great wisdom walked among humans, or when humans themselves possessed knowledge and abilities that have since been lost. The Greeks called it the Age of Gold, when Kronos ruled and humans lived like gods, free from toil and suffering. The Hindus speak of the Satya Yuga, the Age of Truth, when righteousness reigned and humans possessed divine knowledge. The Norse told of a time before Ragnarok, when the gods walked freely in Midgard and wisdom flowed like rivers. Aboriginal Australians remember the dream time, when ancestor spirits shaped the land and taught the first people the secrets of survival. These are not isolated stories. They appear everywhere, in every corner of human culture, like echoes of some vast forgotten symphony. The details change. Sometimes the Golden Age ended in flood, sometimes in fire, sometimes in great forgetting. But the core remains constant. There was a time before our time, a civilization before our civilization, and something happened to end it. For centuries, scholars dismissed these myths as wishful thinking, as humanity's tendency to imagine a perfect past to contrast with an imperfect present. But what if that dismissal was too hasty? What if these stories, passed down through countless generations, preserved something real? Not literal truth, perhaps, but the memory of truth, distorted by time like light bending through water. Consider the flood myths. Nearly every culture on Earth has one. The biblical story of Noah is perhaps the most famous in the Western world, but it is far from unique. The Mesopotamians told of Utnapishtim, who survived the deluge sent by the gods. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the sole survivors of Zeus's flood. Hindu texts describe Manu, who was warned by Vishnu to build a great boat. Native American tribes from the Pacific Northwest to the Amazon basin have their own versions of the great flood that destroyed the world before this one. The standard explanation is that these myths arose independently as different cultures tried to make sense of local flooding events, rivers overflowing their banks, tsunamis devastating coastlines, the gradual rise of sea levels at the end of the last ice age. But there's another possibility, one that sends a chill down the spine when you consider it in the quiet hours of the night. What if all these flood myths remember the same event? What if, somewhere in the deep past, there really was a great deluge, not necessarily global, but vast enough to destroy a civilization so completely that only scattered survivors remain to carry the story forward? What if the flood myths are not separate inventions, but fragments of a single, catastrophic memory? The timeline becomes crucial here. The last ice age ended roughly 12,000 years ago, and with it came dramatic changes to Earth's geography. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet as massive ice sheets melted. Coastlines that had been dry land for millennia disappeared beneath the waves. Entire continental shelves were submerged. If a civilization had existed during the Ice Age, if they had built their cities along the then exposed coasts, those cities would now lie beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water. We know that early humans were far more sophisticated than we once believed. The cave paintings at Lascaux and Altamira, created over 15,000 years ago, display an artistic sophistication that rivals anything produced in recorded history. The megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago, features massive stone pillars carved with intricate reliefs, and it was deliberately buried by its creators as if they were trying to hide it from something or someone. But these are just the traces we've found on dry land. What lies beneath the oceans? What cities, what monuments, what libraries of stone might rest on the continental shelves, covered by centuries of sediment and the weight of the sea? The myths speak of more than just floods. They tell of great wars between gods and titans, of weapons that could level mountains and burn the sky. The Mahabharata describes the Brahmastra, a weapon so terrible it could destroy entire armies and leave the land barren for generations. The Norse Ragnarok speaks of a final battle that will consume the world in fire. The Hopi prophecies tell of previous worlds that ended in destruction, each one a lesson unlearned. Modern readers often interpret these as metaphors or primitive attempts to understand natural disasters. But what if they were something else entirely? What if they were memories of real conflicts, real weapons, real destruction? But from so long ago that the details became mythologized, the technology transformed into magic, the history into legend. There's a haunting consistency to these stories that goes beyond coincidence. They speak of a time when knowledge was greater, when humans, or beings like humans, possessed abilities that seem impossible to us now. They tell of flying vehicles, of weapons that harness the power of the sun, of communication across vast distances, of healing arts that could restore life itself. The Sanskrit epics are particularly rich in such details. The Vimanas, described in texts like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, were flying machines capable of travelling vast distances, even to other worlds. The descriptions are remarkably specific, different types of craft for different purposes, detailed instructions for their construction and operation, accounts of aerial battles between opposing forces. The Vaimanika Shastra, though of disputed age, provides technical specifications that read almost like a manual for advanced aircraft. Similarly, the Book of Ezekiel in the Bible describes the prophet's vision of wheels within wheels, of creatures with multiple faces, of a craft that could move in any direction without turning. Modern UFO researchers have seized upon this as evidence of ancient alien visitation. But what if the truth is both simpler and more profound? What if Ezekiel was describing not visitors from another world, but technology from another time, remnants of a human civilization so advanced that its machines seemed divine to those who encountered them? The Aboriginal Australians speak of the Wangina, sky beings who came from the clouds and taught the first people the laws of existence. Their rock art, some of it tens of thousands of years old, depicts these beings with large eyes and radiating headdresses that look remarkably like modern depictions of astronauts or pilots. But the Wangina were not aliens. They were the ancestors, the first people, the ones who came before. In the Americas, the Aztecs told of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who brought knowledge and civilization to humanity before departing across the eastern sea, promising to return. The Incas spoke of Viracocha, the creator god who emerged from Lake Titicaca and taught the arts of civilization before disappearing into the Pacific. The Maya had Kukulkan, another feathered serpent deity associated with knowledge, astronomy, and the promise of return. These are not stories of gods in the supernatural sense, but of teachers, of culture bringers, of those who possessed knowledge that seemed divine to those who received it. And in every case these beings departed, leaving behind only their teachings and the promise, or threat, that they would return. What if they were not gods at all, but survivors? What if they were the remnants of the previous civilization, the keepers of ancient knowledge, wandering a world that had forgotten how to read the stars or work metal or build in stone? What if they were trying to restart civilization, to pass on what they could before they too passed into legend? The myths tell us something else, something that should make us pause in the darkness and listen more carefully. They tell us that the Golden Age did not end gradually, through slow decline or natural evolution. It ended suddenly, catastrophically, in fire or flood or war. It ended so completely that the survivors had to start over from almost nothing, carrying only fragments of the old knowledge, stories that would become myths, technologies that would become magic. And they tell us something else, something that whispers through the night like wind through ruins. It has happened before, not once but many times. The Hindus speak of cycles within cycles, ages within ages, each one ending in destruction and beginning in renewal. The Maya calculated vast cycles of time, cosmic ages that stretched across millennia. The Hopi speak of 4 previous worlds, each one destroyed when humanity forgot the proper way to live. What if these are not metaphors for spiritual development, but memories of actual cycles? What if civilization on Earth has risen and fallen not once, but many times? What if we are not the first to split the atom, to reach for the stars, to unlock the secrets of genetics and artificial intelligence? What if we are simply the latest in a long line of species that have achieved technological sophistication, only to destroy themselves or be destroyed by forces beyond their control? The myths whisper these possibilities in the darkness, and as we listen, we begin to hear something else. The sound of our own footsteps echoing those who came before. These same ambitions, the same discoveries, the same fatal flaws that led to the end of worlds. And we begin to wonder, are we walking toward our own golden age or toward our own ending? Are we the inheritors of ancient wisdom, or are we simply repeating ancient mistakes? The stories our ancestors told around their fires were not just entertainment. They were warnings. They were maps of where we had been and signs pointing toward where we might go. They were the whispers of deep memory, trying to tell us something crucial about the nature of time, the fragility of civilization, and the terrible beauty of starting over. But that wasn't the whole story. The myths were just the beginning, the first clue in a mystery that would lead us deep into the earth itself, into stones that remember what flesh has forgotten, into ruins that challenge everything we thought we knew about the human journey through time. The stones that remember, beneath the myths, older than the stories, lie the stones. They wait in silence across the world, massive blocks of granite and limestone perfectly fitted together without mortar, carved with precision that challenges our understanding of ancient capabilities. They rise from jungles and deserts, from mountain tops and ocean floors, speaking a language of engineering and astronomy that we are only beginning to decode. And in their silent testimony, they whisper of builders whose skill surpassed anything we attribute to the ancient world. In the high Andes of Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman overlooks the city of Cusco like a sleeping giant. Its walls are built from stone so massive that modern cranes would struggle to lift them, fitted together so precisely that a knife blade cannot slip between them. The largest stone weighs over 300 tons. It was quarried from a site several miles away, transported across difficult terrain, lifted into place with mathematical precision, and shaped to fit perfectly with its neighbours. The conventional explanation is that the Inca built Sacsayhuaman using bronze tools, wooden rollers, and thousands of workers pulling on ropes. But when you stand before those walls in the thin mountain air, when you run your hands along joints so perfect they seem to have been melted together rather than carved, the explanation feels inadequate. The Inca themselves told the Spanish conquistadors that they did not build the great stoneworks, that these were the creations of the people who came before, the ones they called the Viracocha, the foam of the sea. The mystery deepens when you examine the stones themselves. Many show evidence of vitrification, a process where rock is heated to such extreme temperatures that its surface becomes glass-like. This requires temperatures of over 1,000 degrees Celsius, far beyond what any known ancient technology could achieve. Yet there it is, preserved in stone, evidence of a process we cannot explain. Similar megalithic sites dot the globe like markers on some vast forgotten map. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter sits atop a foundation of stones so large they dwarf even those at Sacsayhuaman. The Trilithon, 3 massive blocks that form part of the temple's base, consists of stones weighing over 800 tons each. Nearby lies the stone of the pregnant woman, a single block weighing an estimated 1,000 tons, still partially attached to the bedrock from which it was being quarried. The Romans built the visible temple, but they built it on foundations that were already ancient when they arrived. Local legends speak of a race of giants who placed the great stones in the time before memory. The Romans themselves seemed awed by what they found, incorporating the megalithic base into their own construction rather than attempting to replicate it. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza continues to confound researchers with its mathematical precision and engineering sophistication. Built from over 2 million stone blocks, some weighing 15 tons or more, it was the tallest structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. Its base is level to within just 2.1 centimetres. Its sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree. The ratio of its height to its base perimeter equals pi to several decimal places. But perhaps most mysteriously, the pyramid incorporates knowledge that we didn't think the ancient Egyptians possessed. Its dimensions encode the circumference of the Earth, the length of the year, and the speed of light. The shafts that extend from the king's and queen's chambers point to specific stars: Orion, Draco, Sirius, with astronomical precision. The entire structure seems designed not just as a tomb, but as a kind of 3-dimensional encyclopedia, preserving mathematical and astronomical knowledge in stone. The conventional timeline places the pyramid's construction around 2580 BCE, during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. But this dating is based largely on circumstantial evidence: the presence of Khufu's cartouche in a sealed chamber, the similarity to other 4th dynasty monuments, the assumption that such sophisticated construction must have developed gradually from simpler predecessors. Yet the pyramid stands alone in its perfection. The pyramids that came before it were smaller, cruder, often collapsed or were abandoned mid-construction. The pyramids that came after it were inferior in every measurable way: smaller, less precise, built with inferior materials and techniques. It's as if the Great Pyramid represents not the culmination of a gradual development, but a singular achievement that was never equalled, let alone surpassed. Some researchers have suggested that the pyramid is far older than conventionally believed, that it was built during a previous period of high civilization and later appropriated by the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty. The evidence is circumstantial but intriguing. Water erosion patterns on the Sphinx that suggest it was carved during a much wetter climate, geological evidence of advanced machining techniques, the absence of any mummies or burial goods in the pyramid itself. But Egypt is not alone in preserving evidence of sophisticated ancient engineering. On Easter Island, nearly 900 massive stone statues called moai stand sentinel over the Pacific. The largest completed statue is over 30 feet tall and weighs 82 tons. They were carved from volcanic rock using only stone tools, transported across the island using unknown methods, and erected with precision that required sophisticated understanding of leverage and balance. The islanders themselves, when first contacted by Europeans, had no memory of how the statues were built or moved. They spoke of them as having walked into place, guided by the mana of the ancestors. Recent experiments have shown that the statues could indeed have been walked upright, using a complex system of ropes, but this would have required coordination and engineering knowledge that seems inconsistent with the island's small, isolated population. In Turkey, this site of Göbekli Tepe has revolutionized our understanding of prehistoric capabilities. Built over 11,000 years ago, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the pyramids, it consists of massive stone pillars arranged in circles, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. The pillars weigh up to 16 tons each and were quarried, transported and erected by people who are supposedly still hunter-gatherers, lacking even pottery or metal tools. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, covered with tons of earth, in what appears to have been a massive coordinated effort. Why would a people invest enormous resources in building such a complex, then bury it completely? What were they trying to hide, or preserve, or protect? The carvings at Göbekli Tepe tell their own story. They depict animals that were not native to the region during the supposed time of construction. Lions, crocodiles, exotic birds. They show humans interacting with these animals in ways that suggest domestication, or at least close familiarity. And they include symbols and motifs that appear in later cultures around the world, as if Göbekli Tepe was a source from which knowledge spread to other civilizations. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these megalithic sites is not their individual mysteries, but their global distribution and apparent interconnection. They appear on every continent, built by cultures that had no known contact with each other, yet they share remarkable similarities in construction techniques, astronomical alignments, and symbolic motifs. The precision-cut stones of Sacsayhuaman echo the megalithic walls of Baalbek. The astronomical alignments of the pyramids mirror those found at Stonehenge and Angkor Wat. The spiral motifs carved into stones in Ireland appear also in New Mexico and Easter Island. It's as if these sites were built according to a common template, following shared knowledge that somehow spread across the globe long before the supposed dawn of civilization. Some researchers have proposed that these similarities result from a common human tendency to build in certain ways, to align structures with celestial bodies, to carve similar symbols. But the level of technical sophistication involved suggests something more than coincidence. The ability to quarry, transport, and precisely place stones weighing hundreds of tons requires not just manpower, but advanced understanding of physics, engineering, and logistics. Consider the problem of the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901. This bronze device, dating to around 100 BCE, is a complex mechanical computer capable of predicting the positions of the sun, moon, and planets decades into the future. Its gear system is so sophisticated that nothing comparable appears in the historical record until astronomical clocks began appearing in medieval Europe over 1,000 years later. The mechanism suggests that ancient Greek technology was far more advanced than we previously believed. But it also raises a troubling question. If the Greeks could build such sophisticated devices, what else could they build? What other technologies might have existed in the ancient world that we have no record of because they were made from materials that don't survive, or because the knowledge was lost during periods of collapse and chaos? The stones remember what the written records have forgotten. They preserve evidence of capabilities that don't fit our timeline of human development. They suggest that the ancient world was not a place of primitive peoples struggling with bronze tools and wooden wheels, but a world where at least some cultures possessed knowledge and abilities that we are only now beginning to understand. And they raise the most haunting question of all. If these monuments were built by the civilizations we know about, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Inca, then why do they seem so far beyond those civilizations' other achievements? Why do they stand alone in their sophistication, like islands of advanced knowledge in a sea of more primitive technology? The answer whispered by the stones is one that challenges our most basic assumptions about the past. What if these monuments were not built by the civilizations that claimed them, but inherited by them? What if they are the last surviving works of an earlier people, a previous civilization that possessed knowledge and capabilities that were lost when that civilization fell? The stones cannot tell us who built them or when, not with certainty, but they can tell us that someone did. Someone with knowledge of mathematics and astronomy, with engineering capabilities that rival our own, with the organizational ability to coordinate massive construction projects across generations, someone who understood the movement of the stars, the properties of stone, the principles of leverage and balance and precision. Someone who built not just for their own time, but for ours, as if they knew that their civilization would not last, that their knowledge would be lost, that their very existence would be forgotten, as if they were trying to leave us a message encoded in stone, waiting for us to become sophisticated enough to read it. But the stones were not the only witnesses to the deep past. Hidden in the earth itself, in layers of rock and sediment, in the chemical signatures of ancient atmospheres, lay evidence of events so catastrophic they could erase entire civilizations from the record of time. The scars of catastrophe. The earth remembers everything, in layers of ice and sediment, in the chemical composition of ancient atmospheres trapped in amber, in the magnetic signatures locked within cooling lava. Our planet preserves a record of its history that spans billions of years, and within that record, written in the language of isotopes and impact craters, of mass extinctions and climate shifts, lies evidence of catastrophes so vast they could reset the entire course of life on Earth. We know about the big ones, the events that make it into textbooks and documentaries, the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago, leaving behind a layer of iridium-rich clay that circles the globe like a funeral shroud. The Permian-Triassic extinction 252 million years ago, which eliminated 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates, earning it the nickname the Great Dying. The Toba supervolcanic eruption 74,000 years ago, which may have reduced the human population to as few as 10,000 individuals, creating a genetic bottleneck that we still carry in our DNA. But these are just the catastrophes we can easily see, the ones that left clear signatures in the geological record. What about the smaller ones, the regional disasters that could destroy a civilization without leaving a global trace? What about the events that happened so recently, in geological terms, that their evidence has been obscured by erosion, sedimentation, and the relentless recycling of the Earth's surface? Consider the Younger Dryas, a period of rapid climate change that began around 12,900 years ago and lasted for over a millennium. In the span of just a few decades, global temperatures plummeted, ice sheets advanced and sea levels dropped. Entire ecosystems collapsed. The megafauna of North America, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, went extinct in what appears to have been a sudden, coordinated die-off. The conventional explanation for the Younger Dryas involves changes in ocean circulation patterns as the great ice sheets melted. But a growing body of evidence suggests something more dramatic. A cosmic impact event that triggered the climate shift and the mass extinctions. The evidence includes a layer of sediment from this period that contains high concentrations of platinum, nanodiamonds, and other materials typically associated with extraterrestrial impacts. The proposed impact wasn't a single large asteroid, but a swarm of fragments from a disintegrating comet that struck the Earth's atmosphere and surface across multiple locations. The impacts would have triggered massive wildfires, filled the atmosphere with dust and debris, and disrupted climate patterns across the globe. The effects would have been devastating for any advanced civilization that might have existed at the time, and there's evidence that such a civilization might indeed have existed. The end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,700 years ago, coincides with what archaeologists call the Neolithic Revolution, the sudden, seemingly spontaneous development of agriculture in multiple locations around the world. Within a few thousand years, humans went from hunter-gatherers to farmers, from nomadic tribes to settled communities, from stone tools to complex societies. This transition has always puzzled researchers. Why did it happen so suddenly? And why in so many places at once? The standard explanation is that climate change at the end of the Ice Age created conditions favourable for agriculture, and humans independently discovered farming techniques in different regions. But what if the truth is more complex? What if the Neolithic Revolution wasn't the beginning of civilization, but its restart? What if there had been an earlier civilization, one that had already developed agriculture, metallurgy, and complex social organization, but was destroyed by the cosmic impacts that triggered the Younger Dryas? What if the survivors of that civilization, scattered and reduced to small groups, carried with them fragments of agricultural knowledge that they gradually reintroduced as conditions improved? This would explain the sudden, simultaneous appearance of farming in regions as distant as the Fertile Crescent, China, and Mesoamerica. The evidence for such a scenario is necessarily fragmentary. Any civilization that existed before the Younger Dryas would have had its traces largely erased by the catastrophe itself and the subsequent climate changes. But there are hints, tantalizing suggestions that something more complex was happening in the deep past than our current models suggest. Take the mystery of the Carolina Bays, thousands of elliptical depressions scattered across the southeastern United States. These features, which can be seen clearly from aerial photographs, all point in the same direction, toward the Great Lakes region. They appear to have been created by some kind of impact event, but not from a single large object. Instead, they suggest a shower of smaller impacts, exactly what you might expect from a fragmenting comet. The dating of the Carolina Bays is controversial, but some evidence suggests they were formed around the time of the Younger Dryas. If so, they provide physical evidence for the kind of cosmic catastrophe that could have destroyed an advanced civilization. The impacts would have been devastating across a wide area, triggering fires, floods, and climate disruption that could have wiped out entire populations. Similar impact features have been identified in other parts of the world. In Argentina, a field of glass-like objects called tektites suggests a major impact event in the relatively recent past. In Australia, Aboriginal oral traditions speak of a time when the sky fell and the land burned, descriptions that sound remarkably like eyewitness accounts of cosmic impacts. The traditions are said to be tens of thousands of years old, passed down through countless generations of storytellers. But cosmic impacts are not the only catastrophes that could erase a civilization from the historical record. Supervolcanic eruptions, massive earthquakes, and sudden climate shifts could all have similar effects. The Earth's crust is far more dynamic and unstable than most people realize, capable of dramatic changes that could reshape entire continents in a matter of years or decades. The Lachamp event, which occurred around 41,000 years ago, saw the Earth's magnetic field weaken to just 5% of its current strength, and the magnetic poles flip completely. During this period, the planet would have been bombarded by cosmic radiation, potentially causing widespread mutations, cancer, and sterility in surface-dwelling organisms. Any technological civilization dependent on electronics would have found their systems failing as the protective magnetic shield collapsed. More recently, the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia caused global climate disruption that lasted for years. The following year, 1816, was known as the Year Without a Summer in Europe and North America. Crops failed, famines spread, and social upheaval followed. This was the result of a single volcanic eruption. Imagine the effects of a supervolcanic event like the Toba eruption, but occurring when a technological civilization was at its peak. The geological record shows that such catastrophes are not rare exceptions, but regular features of Earth's history. Years, with smaller but still devastating events happening far more frequently. Volcanic winters, massive earthquakes, tsunami events, and magnetic field reversals are all part of the planet's natural rhythm, a rhythm that could easily interrupt the rise of any technological species. Perhaps most sobering is the realization that our own civilization exists in a brief window of unusual geological stability. The Holocene epoch, which began around 11,700 years ago, has been characterized by a remarkably stable climate and low levels of catastrophic activity. It's during this period of calm that human civilization has been able to develop and flourish. But the geological record suggests that such stable periods are the exception, not the rule. Most of Earth's history has been marked by dramatic swings in climate, frequent catastrophic events, and conditions that would make the development of complex civilization extremely difficult. What if previous attempts at technological civilization arose during earlier stable periods, only to be cut short by the return of geological chaos? What if the rise and fall of civilizations is tied not just to social and political factors, but to deep cycles of planetary stability that operate on timescales far longer than human history? The ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica tell a story of climate that shifts rapidly and unpredictably. Temperature changes of 10 degrees Celsius or more have occurred in the span of just a few decades. Ocean currents that regulate global weather patterns have stopped and started again like a vast planetary engine cycling on and off. During the last ice age, massive freshwater floods from melting glacial lakes repeatedly disrupted ocean circulation, causing sudden shifts between warm and cold periods that would have made long-term planning nearly impossible for any civilization. And yet, scattered throughout this record of chaos and catastrophe, there are anomalies, traces of something that doesn't quite fit the narrative of a planet populated only by hunter-gatherers and simple agricultural communities. In 1972, French scientists discovered something extraordinary in the Oklo uranium mines of Gabon, Africa. The uranium ore showed clear evidence of having undergone nuclear fission reactions, but not recent ones. The isotopic signatures indicated that these reactions had occurred approximately 1.8 billion years ago and had continued for several 100,000 years. The reactions were so well controlled and sustained that they could only have occurred under very specific conditions that shouldn't exist naturally. The official explanation is that these were natural nuclear reactors, created when groundwater acted as a moderator for uranium that was naturally concentrated in the ore body. But the precision required for such reactions to sustain themselves for hundreds of millennia is extraordinary. Some researchers have quietly wondered whether the Oklo reactors might represent something else entirely, evidence of nuclear technology from a previous epoch of Earth's history, when conditions were very different and other forms of life might have achieved technological sophistication. The idea sounds impossible until you consider the vast timescales involved. Complex life has existed on Earth for over 600 million years. Dinosaurs ruled the planet for 865 million years, over 800 times longer than humans have existed. During such immense periods of time, could intelligence have evolved multiple times? Could there have been previous technological species that rose, flourished and vanished long before the first mammals appeared? The challenge of finding evidence for such ancient civilizations would be enormous. Over geological time, the Earth's surface is constantly renewed. Tectonic plates shift and collide, mountains rise and erode away, ocean floors are subducted and recycled. Very little survives unchanged for millions of years, let alone billions. Any artifacts or structures from such ancient times would have been ground to dust long ago. But there might be subtle traces, isotopic anomalies in ancient rocks, unusual mineral deposits, chemical signatures that hint at industrial processes. The Oklo reactors might be just such a trace, a ghostly fingerprint of nuclear technology from an unimaginably distant past. Closer to our own time, other anomalies whisper of possibilities that challenge conventional archaeology. In 1938, German archaeologist Wilhelm König discovered a clay jar in the Iraq Museum that contained a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic solution, the device produces an electrical current, leading some to call it the Baghdad battery. While mainstream archaeology dismisses it as a curiosity with no practical purpose, others wonder whether it represents evidence of electrical knowledge in the ancient world. Similarly, the Antikythera mechanism, with its incredibly sophisticated gear system, suggests that ancient Greek technology was far more advanced than previously believed. If they could build mechanical computers, what other technologies might they have possessed that left no trace in the historical record? But perhaps the most intriguing anomalies are those that hint at knowledge of things that ancient peoples shouldn't have been able to know. The Piri Reis map of 1513, compiled from much older sources, shows the Antarctic coastline as it would appear without ice, something that wouldn't be discovered by modern explorers until the 20th century. The map appears to be based on ancient sources that had somehow mapped Antarctica during one of the brief periods when it was ice-free, something that last occurred millions of years ago. The Nazca lines of Peru present another puzzle. These massive geoglyphs, carved into the desert floor, can only be properly viewed from the air. They depict animals, geometric patterns, and strange figures that stretch for miles across the landscape. Why would an ancient people create artworks that could only be appreciated from a vantage point they supposedly couldn't reach? Some researchers have suggested that the lines were created for astronomical purposes, as a kind of giant calendar or star map. But others wonder whether they might be evidence of ancient flight, whether the people who created them possessed the technology to view their work from above. The idea seems impossible, but then again, so did many other supposed impossibilities that have since been proven true. The science of forgetting. There is a disturbing truth that archaeologists rarely discuss in public. Most of the past is simply gone. The organic materials that made up the bulk of any ancient civilization, wood, textiles, leather, paper, flesh and bone, decay rapidly under most conditions. What we call the archaeological record is really just the debris, the small fraction of material culture that happened to be made from stone, metal or ceramic, and happened to survive in conditions that prevented decay. We're trying to reconstruct entire civilizations from their garbage dumps and broken pottery, like archaeologists of the future trying to understand our world based solely on landfills and the foundations of buildings. This realization becomes particularly unsettling when you consider how quickly even our most impressive achievements could vanish without maintenance. The steel and concrete that make up our cities are not permanent materials. They are temporary borrowings from the earth that will return to rust and dust in a matter of centuries without constant upkeep. Our electronics, our computers, our vast networks of information storage, all of it depends on continuous maintenance and renewal. Pull the plug on human civilization tomorrow, and within 1,000 years most traces of our technological achievement would be unrecognizable. The only things that would survive in recognizable form would be our stone monuments, Mount Rushmore perhaps, or the Great Dams, and even these would eventually succumb to erosion and collapse. Within 10,000 years, an alien archaeologist visiting Earth would find mostly puzzling ruins, strange isotopic signatures in the soil, and perhaps some very durable plastics that had somehow survived the intervening millennia. Now imagine that timeline extended not just thousands of years into the future, but millions. What would be left of us then? What would survive to tell future investigators that humans had once built cities, split atoms, and reached for the stars? The answer is sobering. Almost nothing. Perhaps some isotopic anomalies from our nuclear tests, a thin layer of unusual materials in the geological record, maybe some extremely durable artifacts buried in very specific conditions. Future scientists would have to be extraordinarily clever and persistent to detect our presence in the deep geological record. This is the problem that faces us when we try to look for evidence of previous technological civilizations on Earth. If such civilizations existed hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, their traces would be incredibly faint and difficult to detect. We would need to know exactly what to look for and where to look for it. But there might be subtle signs, fingerprints of industrial activity that could persist across geological time. Large-scale mining operations would leave permanent scars in the Earth's crust. The use of fossil fuels would alter the carbon isotope ratios in the atmosphere in ways that might be preserved in ice cores or sedimentary rocks. Nuclear technology would leave distinctive radioactive signatures. Mass extinctions caused by environmental degradation would show up in the fossil record. Some researchers have begun to search for such signatures systematically. The concept has been dubbed the Silurian hypothesis, named after a science fiction race of reptilian beings who ruled Earth before humans. The idea is not to look for artifacts or ruins, but for the subtle geochemical traces that an industrial civilization would inevitably leave behind. The search has turned up some intriguing possibilities. There are periods in Earth's history marked by unusual isotopic signatures, sudden changes in atmospheric composition, and mass extinctions that seem to occur too rapidly to be explained by known natural processes. The Permian-Triassic extinction, for instance, involved not just the death of most species on Earth, but dramatic changes in ocean chemistry and atmospheric composition that happened over an extremely short period of time. Could such events have been caused by runaway industrial activity rather than natural catastrophes? Could previous civilizations have triggered their own extinction through environmental destruction, leaving behind only the chemical signatures of their final collapse? The idea is speculative, but it highlights a crucial point. The absence of obvious evidence for previous civilizations doesn't mean they didn't exist. It might simply mean we don't yet know how to recognize their traces. Consider how much of our own history would be lost if not for written records. The vast majority of human cultures throughout history were pre-literate, preserving their knowledge through oral tradition alone. When those cultures disappeared, through conquest, disease, or environmental collapse, their stories, their technologies, their entire ways of understanding the world vanished with them. Even literate civilizations are incredibly fragile. The Library of Alexandria, which once contained perhaps 500,000 scrolls representing the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, was gradually destroyed through neglect, religious persecution, and political upheaval. When it finally burned, centuries of scientific and philosophical achievement turned to ash in a matter of hours. The same pattern has repeated throughout history. The Maya developed sophisticated writing systems, advanced astronomy, and complex mathematical concepts. Then their civilization collapsed, and most of their books were deliberately burned by Spanish conquistadors who saw them as works of the devil. Today, we have only 4 surviving Maya codices from a culture that once produced thousands of books. The lesson is clear. Knowledge is far more fragile than we like to believe. Entire bodies of learning can vanish in a single generation if they are not actively preserved and transmitted. Technologies can be lost, rediscovered, and lost again. The wheel, for instance, was invented multiple times by different cultures, and was also abandoned by some cultures that had previously used it. If this can happen to civilizations separated by mere centuries or millennia, what about those separated by hundreds of thousands or millions of years? How many times might intelligence have emerged on Earth, reached technological sophistication, and then vanish so completely that no trace remains? The possibility becomes even more intriguing when you consider the deep time perspective. Earth has been habitable for billions of years. Complex life has existed for over 600 million years. Dinosaurs ruled for 165 million years, a period so vast that entire species evolved and went extinct without leaving any trace in the fossil record. During such immense spans of time, natural selection has had countless opportunities to produce intelligence. We tend to think of human-level intelligence as the pinnacle of evolution, but there's no reason to assume we represent the first or only time such intelligence has emerged. Indeed, given enough time, it seems almost inevitable that intelligence would evolve multiple times, in multiple forms. Some of these intelligences might have been very different from our own. They might have been aquatic civilizations that built their cities on the seafloor, leaving no trace after the ocean basins were recycled through tectonic processes. They might have been silicon-based rather than carbon-based, creating technologies we wouldn't recognize as such. They might have been collective intelligences, vast networks of cooperating organisms that achieved technological sophistication without ever developing individual consciousness as we understand it. The more we learn about the diversity and resilience of life on Earth, the more plausible such scenarios become. We have discovered organisms that thrive in conditions previously thought to be lethal. In boiling acid springs, in the crushing depths of ocean trenches, in solid rock miles beneath the surface. Life is far more adaptable and creative than we ever imagined. If life can flourish in such extreme environments, why not intelligence? Why not technological civilization? The only reason we assume such things are rare or unique is that we have only one example to study, ourselves. But what if we are not unique at all, but simply the latest in a long series of intelligent species that have risen and fallen across the vast expanse of Earth's history? The Watchers in the Deep. In the deepest parts of our oceans, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush human bones to powder, strange things move in the eternal darkness. We know less about our own ocean depth than we do about the surface of Mars. Less than 20% of the ocean floor has been mapped in detail, and less than 5% has been directly explored. The deepest parts of the ocean trenches might as well be alien worlds. So little do we understand about what lies beneath the crushing weight of miles of water. But what we have discovered in those depths is extraordinary. Entire ecosystems that exist independent of sunlight, drawing energy from chemical processes around volcanic vents. Creatures so bizarre they seem like products of science fiction. Transparent organisms with bioluminescent organs, ancient species that have remained virtually unchanged for hundreds of millions of years, vast networks of bacterial colonies that might represent some of the oldest forms of life on Earth. In 1977, researchers exploring the Galapagos Rift discovered something that revolutionized biology: hydrothermal vents surrounded by thriving communities of life in the complete absence of sunlight. These ecosystems are based on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis, using chemical energy from the Earth's interior to support complex food webs. The discovery suggested that life might be far more widespread in the universe than previously thought. If life could thrive in Earth's deepest, darkest places, it might also exist in the subsurface oceans of moons like Europa or Enceladus. But the deep ocean holds other mysteries that are harder to explain. In recent years, underwater exploration has revealed structures that don't fit easily into our understanding of natural geological processes. Strange geometric formations on the sea floor, perfectly circular depressions that extend for miles, underwater roads of fitted stones that seem too regular to be natural. Most of these anomalies are dismissed as pareidolia, our tendency to see patterns and purpose in random natural formations. But some are harder to explain away. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument appears to be a massive stepped pyramid submerged beneath 75 feet of water. The structure shows clear evidence of right angles, straight edges, and geometric precision that seem inconsistent with natural erosion patterns. Mainstream archaeology insists that Yonaguni is a natural formation, carved by water and tectonic activity over millions of years. But marine geologist Robert Schoch, who has studied the site extensively, argues that while the basic structure may be natural, it shows clear evidence of human modification. Tool marks, carved steps, and geometric alterations suggest that someone worked the natural formation into a more regular, purposeful shape. If Schoch is correct, the implications are staggering. The Yonaguni Monument was last above sea level over 12,000 years ago, during the Ice Age when ocean levels were much lower. This would mean that sophisticated stoneworking cultures existed in the region long before conventional archaeology suggests such capabilities developed. But Yonaguni is not alone. Similar underwater structures have been reported off the coasts of India, Cuba, and the Mediterranean. In the Gulf of Cambay off western India, sonar has detected what appears to be a large city submerged beneath 120 feet of water. The site includes geometric structures, grid-like street patterns, and what look like step pyramids. Carbon dating of artifacts dredged from the site has yielded dates of up to 9,500 years ago. The implications are profound. If these underwater sites are indeed artificial, the remains of cities and monuments built when sea levels were lower, they suggest that sophisticated civilizations existed during the Ice Age, thousands of years before conventional history begins. And if such civilizations existed, they would have been perfectly positioned along the then exposed continental shelves, in the most fertile and resource-rich areas of the ancient world. When the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose by 400 feet or more, these coastal civilizations would have been inundated. Their cities, their ports, their monuments. Everything would have disappeared beneath the waves. Only scattered survivors would have remained, carrying fragments of knowledge to higher ground, preserving what they could in stories and myths while struggling to rebuild in a changed world. This scenario would explain many of the puzzles that have long perplexed archaeologists. Why do the earliest known civilizations appear so suddenly and fully formed, without clear developmental stages? Why do isolated cultures around the world share similar technologies and architectural styles? Why do flood myths appear in nearly every human culture? The answer might be that civilization didn't begin with the rise of agriculture 11,000 years ago. It restarted then, rebuilt by survivors of much older cultures that had been destroyed by rising seas and climate change at the end of the Ice Age. But the deep ocean might hold more than just the ruins of lost cities. In the abyssal depths, where pressure and cold have preserved organic materials for millions of years, there might be evidence of life forms that evolved intelligence long before vertebrates colonized the land. Consider the cephalopods, octopi, squid, and their relatives. These creatures evolved complex nervous systems and sophisticated behaviors completely independent of the vertebrate line that eventually produced humans. Octopi demonstrate problem-solving abilities, tool use, and what appears to be individual personality. They can change their skin color and texture to communicate complex messages, effectively giving them a form of language written in living color across their bodies. But octopi have short lifespans and no way to pass knowledge from one generation to the next except through genetic programming. They must learn everything anew in each short life. What if, in the deep past, some branch of cephalopod evolution had overcome this limitation? What if they had developed longer lifespans or, better yet, collective memory systems that allowed knowledge to accumulate across generations? Such a species might have developed a very different kind of intelligence from our own. One based on fluid adaptation and rapid learning rather than tool-making and environmental modification. They might have built cities from coral and cultivated sea gardens rather than smelting metals and quarrying stone. Their technology might have been biological rather than mechanical, leaving no trace that we would recognize as artificial. In the deepest ocean trenches, isolated from surface changes for millions of years, such civilizations might have risen and fallen without ever leaving evidence that surface-dwelling archaeologists would recognize. Their ruins would be dissolved by the corrosive deep-sea environment, their artifacts consumed by bacteria, their very existence erased by the slow, patient chemistry of the abyss. The idea sounds like science fiction, but recent discoveries have revealed that the deep ocean is far stranger and more dynamic than we ever imagined. Vast communities of microorganisms exist in the sediments of the ocean floor, some of them billions of years old, living at the very edge of what we consider possible for life. These deep biosphere communities might represent the most ancient forms of life on Earth, preserving genetic and biochemical information from epochs when the planet was very different. What if some of these ancient communities evolved beyond simple microorganisms? What if, given the vast timescales available, they developed complex behaviors, communication systems, even forms of consciousness that we cannot recognize because they operate on completely different principles from our own? The ocean depths might be inhabited by forms of intelligence so alien to our experience that we lack the conceptual framework to even recognize them as intelligent. They might communicate through chemical signals that take years to propagate across ocean basins. They might think in geological time, with individual thoughts lasting centuries and conversations spanning millennia. They might perceive reality through senses we don't possess. experiencing the world as patterns of pressure and chemical gradients, magnetic fields and subsonic vibrations. Such intelligences might have watched the rise and fall of surface civilizations with the detached interest of gods observing the brief lives of mayflies. They might have accumulated knowledge across millions of years, developing understanding of the universe that makes our science seem primitive and limited. And they might still be there, in the crushing depths, patiently observing as we take our first tentative steps into the deep ocean that has been their domain since long before the first fish crawled onto land. This possibility, that Earth's oceans might harbour ancient intelligences that predate terrestrial life by millions or billions of years, adds yet another layer to the mystery of what came before us. We search for evidence of previous civilizations in stone monuments and mythological stories, but perhaps we should be looking deeper, into realms so alien and hostile to our form of life that we never thought to consider them as potential homes for intelligence. The deep ocean keeps its secrets well. In its crushing darkness and impossible cold, in its corrosive chemistry and alien pressures, evidence of previous intelligences might rest beyond our ability to detect or comprehend. We are surface dwellers, creatures of air and light, trying to understand a world that is fundamentally underwater, fundamentally dark, fundamentally different from everything we know about the requirements for complex life. But as our technology improves and our understanding deepens, we are beginning to probe those depths more systematically. Each dive, each sonar survey, each sample brought up from the abyssal plains adds to our knowledge of what lies beneath. And sometimes, just sometimes, we find things that don't quite fit our expectations, anomalies that hint at complexities we haven't yet learned to interpret. The ocean depths are vast beyond imagination, deeper than our highest mountains, more alien than the surface of Mars. If intelligence has evolved multiple times on Earth across its billions of years of history, some of those intelligences might have chosen the depths over the shallows, the eternal darkness over the brief flicker of sunlight. They might still be there, waiting in the deep, watching and remembering everything that has ever lived and died on the surface of their water world. The genetic ghosts. Hidden within the spiral staircase of human DNA lies a library more vast and mysterious than any archive built from stone or paper. Our genome contains not just the blueprint for building a human body, but the entire evolutionary history of life on Earth, a genetic memory that stretches back billions of years to the first replicating molecules that learned to copy themselves in ancient seas. But DNA holds more than evolutionary history. It holds evidence of bottlenecks and expansions, of populations that nearly went extinct and others that exploded across continents. It records the effects of diseases, disasters, and dramatic environmental changes. And within that record, geneticists are discovering patterns that don't quite match the neat timelines of human migration and development that we've constructed from archaeological evidence. The most startling revelation has been how recently our species came close to extinction, not once, but multiple times. The genetic evidence suggests that around 70,000 years ago, the human population crashed to perhaps as few as 2,000 breeding individuals. The entire future of our species balanced on the edge of oblivion, survivors scattered across a continent, carrying with them a severely restricted gene pool that we still carry today. This bottleneck coincides roughly with the Toba supervolcanic eruption, one of the largest volcanic events in the past 2 million years. The eruption threw enough ash and sulfur into the atmosphere to trigger a volcanic winter that lasted for years, dramatically reducing global temperatures and making survival extremely difficult for human populations that were still heavily dependent on hunting and gathering. But the genetic evidence suggests this wasn't the only near-extinction event in human history. There are signs of earlier bottlenecks, earlier crashes in population that reduced our ancestors to small, isolated groups, struggling to survive in a hostile world. Each time, somehow, the species recovered, but not without losing something in the process. What's particularly intriguing is that some of these population crashes don't correspond to any known natural disasters. The genetic signatures suggest sudden, dramatic reductions in population that occurred during periods when the climate was relatively stable and conditions should have favoured human expansion. It's as if entire populations simply vanished, leaving only small remnant groups to carry the human lineage forward. This pattern becomes even more mysterious when you consider the genetic diversity of modern human populations. Despite having spread across the entire globe, humans are remarkably genetically uniform compared to other species. We have less genetic diversity than chimpanzees, who are confined to a much smaller area of Africa. This suggests that our global expansion happened very recently and from a very small founding population. But there are anomalies in our genetic structure that hint at a more complex history. Traces of DNA that don't fit the straightforward narrative of human evolution from Africa. Genetic markers that suggest ancient admixture with populations that shouldn't have existed according to conventional timelines. Sequences that appear to have been acquired through horizontal gene transfer, a process common in bacteria but supposedly impossible in complex organisms like humans. Most controversial are the findings related to what geneticists call ghost populations, human-like groups that contributed genetic material to modern humans but left no direct descendants and no archaeological trace. These populations are detected only through their genetic signatures, like shadows cast by people who have long since walked out of the light. The most famous of these ghost populations are the Denisovans, known only from a few fragments of bone found in a Siberian cave, but whose genetic legacy makes up 2 to 3% of the genome of modern Melanesians and Aboriginal Australians. The Denisovans apparently lived across a vast area of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, yet we have almost no physical evidence of their existence, just their genetic fingerprints preserved in the DNA of their distant descendants. But genetic analysis suggests there were other ghost populations as well, groups that contributed to human ancestry, but whose physical remains have never been found. Some of these populations appear to have had unusual characteristics, genetic adaptations that suggest they lived in extreme environments or had unusual physiological capabilities. Perhaps most intriguingly, some researchers have identified genetic sequences in modern humans that appear to be much older than they should be, according to standard models of human evolution. These archaic sequences don't match any known human ancestor, but seem to represent genetic contributions from populations that diverged from the main human line hundreds of thousands or even millions of years ago. The conventional explanation is that these sequences represent contamination from other hominin species that modern humans encountered and interbred with during their expansion out of Africa. But some researchers have proposed a more radical possibility, that these genetic ghosts represent the remnants of earlier human civilizations that achieved technological sophistication long before our own. The idea is based on the observation that technological development can dramatically affect evolutionary pressures. A species that develops agriculture, medicine, and complex social organization can survive in environments and in population densities that would be impossible for hunter-gatherers. They can also develop genetic adaptations to the artificial environments they create. Resistance to diseases spread by dense urban populations, ability to digest agricultural products, tolerance for the toxins produced by metallurgy and manufacturing. If such a technological species existed, in the deep past their genetic signature might persist even after their civilization collapsed, and their descendants reverted to hunter-gatherer lifestyles. The technological adaptations would become evolutionary baggage, genetic sequences that served no function in a post-civilizational environment, but persisted simply because they weren't actively harmful. Over thousands or tens of thousands of years, most such sequences would be gradually eliminated by natural selection. But some might persist, especially if they were linked to other genes that did provide survival advantages. These genetic ghosts would be detectable by modern analysis as sequences that seem too old, too complex, or too specialized for the environments in which they're found. The genetic evidence becomes even more intriguing when combined with recent discoveries about the antiquity and sophistication of human behavior. Archaeological sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa have revealed evidence of symbolic behavior, artistic expression, and complex tool-making dating back over 100,000 years, much earlier than previously thought possible. At Blombos, archaeologists have found carefully crafted shell beads, ochre crayons with abstract engravings, and sophisticated bone tools that required advanced planning and technical skill to create. The site suggests that modern human cognition and behavior emerged much earlier than the Great Leap Forward that supposedly occurred around 40,000 years ago. But if modern human behavior emerged 100,000 or even 200,000 years ago, what were our ancestors doing during the intervening millennia? The archaeological record shows long periods of apparent stasis punctuated by sudden bursts of innovation. Technologies appear, disappear, and reappear again thousands of years later. Artistic traditions start and stop with no clear explanation. This pattern is puzzling if you assume steady progressive development, but it makes perfect sense if you assume that human populations went through repeated cycles of advancement and collapse. Technologies would be developed during periods of population growth and cultural stability, then lost during environmental crises or social upheaval. Survivors would preserve fragments of knowledge, but it might take thousands of years for conditions to become favourable enough for that knowledge to be fully redeveloped and expanded upon. The genetic evidence supports this cyclical model. The population bottlenecks recorded in our DNA correspond to periods when technologies and cultural traditions would have been most vulnerable to loss. Each crash would have scattered the surviving populations, breaking up the social networks that preserved and transmitted complex knowledge. But each recovery would have started from a higher baseline than the previous cycle. The survivors would carry not just genetic memories of adaptation, but cultural memories of what was possible. They would know that humans could work metal, build monuments, navigate by the stars. Even if they had temporarily lost the specific knowledge of how to do these things. This might explain the sudden appearance of sophisticated technologies in the archaeological record. The Neolithic Revolution, the Bronze Age, the development of writing and mathematics. All of these might represent not the first invention of these technologies, but their reinvention by populations who carried genetic and cultural memories of earlier achievements. The human genome is a palimpsest, a manuscript that has been written over and erased and written over again countless times. Each layer tells a different story about our past, and the deepest layers preserve memories so ancient that we're only now learning how to read them. As our techniques for genetic analysis become more sophisticated, we're uncovering evidence of complexities in human history that challenge our most basic assumptions about who we are and where we came from. We are the children of survivors of volcanic winters and cosmic impacts, of climate shifts and population crashes, of the rise and fall of civilizations whose names we never learned because they forgot how to write them down. We carry within our cells the genetic memories of all those who came before us, the accumulated wisdom and experience of 1,000,000 generations of ancestors who faced the darkness and somehow found a way forward. But we also carry something else, the genetic potential for all the capabilities and achievements of those who came before us. If previous human populations developed sophisticated technologies, if they built civilizations and created art and music and literature, then the genetic capacity for those achievements still exists within us. We are not just the inheritors of their failures, but of their possibilities. In the spiraling darkness of our DNA, the ghosts of previous civilizations whisper their secrets to anyone who knows how to listen. They tell us that we have been here before, that we have risen and fallen and risen again, that the human story is far older and more complex than we ever imagined. And they tell us something else, something that echoes through the generations like a promise or a warning. We can do it again. The keepers of time. In the pre-dawn darkness of winter solstice morning, atop the hill of Newgrange in Ireland, something miraculous happens that has been happening for over 5,000 years. As the sun rises above the horizon, a single shaft of golden light penetrates the roof box of the ancient passage tomb, travels down the 60-foot corridor, and illuminates the triple spiral carved into the back wall of the burial chamber. For exactly 17 minutes, the heart of the monument blazes with light, then returns to darkness for another year. This is not an accident. The entire massive structure, 200 feet in diameter, built from 200,000 tons of stone and earth, was designed and constructed with mathematical precision to capture this single moment of cosmic alignment. The builders had to understand not just basic astronomy, but the complex mechanics of Earth's orbit, the precession of the equinoxes, and the subtle variations in the sun's path across the sky that occur over centuries. Newgrange predates Stonehenge by 500 years and the Great Pyramid by 600 years. It was built by Neolithic farmers who supposedly had only stone tools, wooden rollers, and basic agricultural knowledge. Yet the astronomical calculations required for its construction would challenge modern engineers equipped with computers and precise instruments. This is the paradox that haunts our understanding of the ancient world. Again and again, we find evidence of astronomical knowledge so sophisticated, so precise, so far-reaching in its implications that it seems to come from a completely different level of civilization than the one we think we're studying. The phenomenon is global. In the jungles of Guatemala, the Maya calculated the length of the solar year to 365.420 days, more accurate than the Julian calendar that Europe would use for another 1,000 years. They tracked the cycles of Venus with an error of only 2 hours over a period of 500 years. They predicted eclipses centuries into the future and recorded astronomical events from centuries in the past. At Nabta Playa in the Egyptian desert, stone circles arranged by cattle herders 7,000 years ago align with the rising of Sirius and the summer solstice. But the alignments were not designed for the time when they were built. They point to where these celestial events occurred thousands of years earlier, suggesting the builders were working from much older astronomical records. In Cambodia, the massive temple complex of Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century, mirrors the constellation Draco as it appeared at the spring equinox in 10,500 BCE, over 11,000 years before the temple was constructed. The correlation is so precise that it seems impossible to attribute to coincidence. These examples multiply across every continent and every epoch of human history. Ancient structures aligned to celestial events with pinpoint accuracy, calendars that track cosmic cycles spanning thousands of years, myths and texts that preserve astronomical data from times so remote that the knowledge they contain couldn't have been gathered by the cultures that preserved them. The conventional explanation is that ancient peoples were keen observers of the sky, and that over many generations they accumulated accurate astronomical knowledge through patient observation and record keeping. This explanation works for simple phenomena, tracking the phases of the moon, noting the seasonal movement of constellations, predicting the annual flood cycles. But it falls apart when we examine the more sophisticated examples. The precession of the equinoxes, for instance, is a phenomenon that takes 25,020 years to complete one full cycle. It's caused by a wobble in Earth's axis that makes the position of the north celestial pole shift slowly against the background of stars. To detect this movement requires not just centuries of careful observation, but a conceptual framework sophisticated enough to separate this subtle effect from all the other complex motions of celestial objects. Yet evidence for knowledge of precession appears throughout the ancient world. The Egyptians encoded it in their mythology, describing ages ruled by different gods that correspond to different precessional epochs. The Greeks inherited this knowledge and developed it into a formal astronomical theory. Hindu and Buddhist texts describe vast cosmic cycles that match precessional periods with remarkable accuracy. Most intriguingly, this knowledge appears to be embedded in monuments and myths from cultures that had no known contact with each other. The precessional cycle appears in Norse mythology, in Mesoamerican calendars, in the astronomical alignments of temples across Asia and Africa. It's as if this knowledge was part of a global heritage, preserved and transmitted by different cultures across vast spans of time. Consider the problem of longitude. For most of human history, determining one's position east or west on the globe was one of navigation's greatest challenges. The problem wasn't solved in Europe until the 18th century, with the development of accurate marine chronometers that could keep precise time during long ocean voyages. Yet the ancient Egyptians somehow managed to align the Great Pyramid with true cardinal directions to within 3/60th of a degree. The pyramid's base is also level to within just 2.1 centimeters across its entire 230-meter width. This level of precision requires not just sophisticated surveying techniques, but accurate knowledge of the Earth's shape and rotation. Similarly, many ancient sites around the world are positioned at locations that seem to have been chosen for their geometric relationships to other sites thousands of miles away. The Great Pyramid sits at exactly 30 degrees north latitude, 1/3 of the way from the equator to the pole. Angkor Wat is precisely 72 degrees of longitude east of the pyramids at Giza, a relationship that corresponds to the precessional number 72, the number of years it takes for precession to shift the celestial pole by 1 degree. These geometric relationships appear too frequently and too precisely to be coincidental. They suggest a level of global coordination and mathematical sophistication that seems impossible for ancient civilizations using supposedly primitive technologies. How did builders in Egypt communicate with builders in Cambodia? How did they achieve such precise measurements across continental distances? One possibility is that these monuments were built according to a master plan developed by a civilization with global reach and sophisticated technology. A civilization that predated the individual cultures we credit with their construction. The monuments we see today might be reconstructions or modifications of much older sites, built according to plans and alignments established in a remote antiquity. This would explain another puzzling aspect of ancient astronomical sites. Many of them seem to commemorate celestial events that occurred thousands of years before the monuments were built. The Sphinx's gaze toward the constellation Leo corresponds to the spring equinox of 10,500 BCE, when Leo rose directly in front of the monument at dawn. The star maps in Egyptian temples show the night sky as it appeared millennia before those temples were constructed. It's as if the builders were trying to preserve memories of specific moments in deep time, cosmic anniversaries that held special significance for reasons we no longer understand. But why would ancient peoples go to such extraordinary effort to commemorate astronomical events from their distant past? What was so important about these particular moments in cosmic history? The answer might lie in the growing realization that Earth's relationship with the cosmos is far more dynamic and dangerous than we once believed. The solar system moves through different regions of the galaxy over vast periods of time, encountering varying densities of cosmic dust, different levels of radiation, and gravitational influences from nearby stars. These cosmic environments can have profound effects on Earth's climate, magnetic field, and the evolution of life itself. Recent research has revealed that the solar system's orbit around the galactic center brings us through regions of space with very different properties. Every 26 million years or so, we pass through the galactic plane, where the density of matter and energy is much higher than in the quieter regions where we normally reside. These passages correlate with periods of increased cosmic radiation, climate disruption, and mass extinctions in Earth's geological record. The cycle isn't perfectly regular. It's influenced by the gravitational effects of nearby stars, the structure of spiral arms in the galaxy, and other cosmic factors that can accelerate or delay our passage through these dangerous regions. But ancient astronomers, given enough time and careful observation, might have detected these patterns and learned to predict when Earth would be most vulnerable to cosmic catastrophes. This could explain the obsession with long-term astronomical cycles that appears in so many ancient cultures. The Maya long count calendar, which tracks a cycle of 5,125 years, might not be arbitrary. It might correspond to a period during which specific cosmic dangers recur. The Hindu concept of yugas, vast cosmic ages lasting hundreds of thousands of years, might preserve knowledge of even longer cycles that affect the stability of civilizations on Earth. If previous civilizations had achieved a level of astronomical sophistication that allowed them to detect these cosmic cycles, they might have devoted enormous resources to preserving this knowledge for their descendants. The monuments and calendars and myths might all be part of a vast early warning system designed to help future civilizations recognize when dangerous periods were approaching and prepare accordingly. This interpretation gives new meaning to many ancient texts that describe cycles of creation and destruction, golden ages followed by catastrophic endings. The Hindu Puranas describe 4 yugas that repeat endlessly, with each cycle ending in dissolution and renewal. The Maya believed in multiple creation cycles, each ending when the gods became dissatisfied with their creations and destroyed the world to start over. Norse mythology describes Ragnarok as part of an eternal cycle, where the world is destroyed and reborn with each cosmic age. These might not be metaphysical concepts or moral allegories, but practical astronomical information encoded in mythological language. The gods who destroy and recreate the world might represent cosmic forces, galactic radiation, solar variations, gravitational disruptions that periodically threaten the stability of Earth's biosphere. The ages might correspond to real periods of cosmic safety and danger that repeat according to astronomical cycles spanning thousands or millions of years. From this perspective, the ancient monuments take on a different significance. They weren't just temples or tombs, but observatories and record-keeping systems designed to track humanity's progress through these cosmic cycles. The precise astronomical alignments weren't just religious symbolism, but functional instruments for measuring Earth's position in space and time. The Great Pyramid, for instance, might have served as a kind of cosmic clock, its internal chambers and passages aligned to track the movement of specific stars and constellations over vast periods of time. The King's Chamber points toward Orion, associated in Egyptian mythology with Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. The Queen's Chamber points toward Sirius, linked with Isis, the goddess of magic and renewal. These weren't arbitrary choices. They might represent stars whose behavior serves as markers for Earth's passage through different cosmic environments. Similarly, Stonehenge's complex arrangement of stones creates multiple sight lines that track not just annual solar and lunar cycles, but much longer periods of celestial motion. The monument was built in phases over more than 1,500 years, with each phase adding new capabilities for astronomical observation and calculation. The final structure could predict eclipses decades in advance and track the 18.6-year cycle of lunar standstills with remarkable precision. But Stonehenge's most mysterious feature might be its acoustic properties. Recent research has revealed that the circle of stones creates a unique sound environment, amplifying certain frequencies while dampening others. Specific locations within the circle produce distinct resonances when sounds are made, almost as if the monument was designed as a kind of acoustic instrument. This raises intriguing possibilities about how astronomical knowledge was preserved and transmitted in ancient times. Sound and music can encode complex information in memorable patterns that persist across generations even when written records are lost. The specific frequencies produced at Stonehenge might correspond to astronomical cycles, with different tones representing different periods of cosmic time. Many ancient cultures associated music and mathematics with cosmic harmony. The Pythagoreans believed that celestial bodies produced musical tones as they moved through space, and that understanding these cosmic harmonies was the key to understanding the structure of the universe. Hindu traditions describe the universe as being created and sustained by sound vibrations, with different frequencies corresponding to different levels of cosmic manifestation. If advanced ancient astronomers had discovered mathematical relationships between cosmic cycles and harmonic frequencies, they might have encoded crucial astronomical data in musical forms that could be preserved and transmitted through oral tradition, even during periods when written records were lost. The songs and chants that accompany ancient rituals might contain sophisticated astronomical information disguised as religious or ceremonial content. This possibility becomes more intriguing when we consider how much astronomical knowledge has been preserved in seemingly primitive cultural forms. Aboriginal Australian songlines encode precise navigation information across thousands of miles of continent, with each song corresponding to specific landmarks, water sources, and seasonal patterns. The information is so accurate that modern GPS systems confirm the precision of traditional navigation techniques that have been passed down orally for tens of thousands of years. Similarly, Polynesian navigators used traditional charts and stick charts to guide voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean, using techniques that allowed them to determine their position by reading wave patterns, star positions, and subtle environmental cues. These methods were far more sophisticated than European navigation techniques available at the same time, yet they required no written records or mechanical instruments, just precise cultural knowledge passed down through generations of master navigators. If such sophisticated information could be preserved in traditional forms for thousands of years, what about astronomical knowledge developed by previous technological civilizations? What if the myths and monuments we've inherited contain not just simple observations of celestial phenomena, but precise mathematical data about cosmic cycles that affect the long-term survival of Earth's biosphere? The implications are staggering. Every ancient culture might be the guardian of fragments of a vast astronomical database compiled over millions of years by successive civilizations. The monuments might be backup systems designed to preserve crucial information, even if the cultures that built them collapse completely. The myths might be mnemonic devices that encode complex mathematical relationships in story form, allowing essential knowledge to survive even when its scientific context is forgotten. From this perspective, our current civilization occupies a unique position in the cosmic cycle. We have developed the technological capability to verify and extend the astronomical knowledge preserved by our predecessors, but we may be running out of time to fully decode and understand it before the next dangerous period in Earth's cosmic journey begins. The ancient astronomers knew something that we're only beginning to rediscover, that Earth's fate is intimately connected to cosmic cycles operating on scales much larger than human history. They devoted enormous resources to tracking these cycles and preserving the knowledge for future generations. The question now is whether we can decode their warnings quickly enough to benefit from their hard-won wisdom. As we stand at the threshold of becoming a truly spacefaring civilization, we might be approaching a cosmic test that previous civilizations failed. The monuments they left behind might not just be archaeological curiosities, but survival manuals for navigating the dangerous periods that lie ahead. The time has come to take their warnings seriously and learn from their example, before it's too late to avoid repeating their fate. The archive of everything deep beneath the Giza Plateau in chambers that official archaeology claims do not exist. Legend speaks of a vast library containing the complete records of human civilization. The Hall of Records, as it has been called, supposedly holds not just the history of Egypt, but the entire story of humanity's rise and fall across multiple epochs of deep time. No such chamber has ever been found, despite decades of ground-penetrating radar surveys, drilling projects, and exhaustive exploration of the Giza complex. Yet the legend persists, supported by ancient Egyptian texts that speak of hidden repositories of wisdom, by the testimony of classical authors who claim to have seen such archives, and by the nagging sense that a civilization capable of building the Great Pyramid must have possessed knowledge far beyond what their surviving texts reveal. But what if the Hall of Records was never meant to be a single physical location? What if the ancient keepers of knowledge were far cleverer than we imagined, distributing their most precious information across multiple storage systems designed to survive different types of catastrophes? The more we study ancient monuments, texts, and traditions, the more they seem to function as components of a vast distributed archive, a global information storage network that preserves crucial knowledge in multiple redundant formats designed to survive the collapse of individual civilizations. Consider the mathematical constants embedded in the Great Pyramid. Its dimensions encode not just pi and the golden ratio, but the circumference of the Earth, the length of the year, the speed of light, and dozens of other physical constants that supposedly weren't discovered until modern times. These numbers aren't just carved into the stone, they're built into the very structure of the monument, preserved in ratios and proportions that would survive even if all surface decorations were eroded away. This technique of encoding information in architectural proportions appears at sites around the world. Angkor Wat's dimensions correspond to cosmic cycles measured in thousands of years. Stonehenge's geometry encodes astronomical constants and mathematical relationships. The Mayan pyramids at Chichen Itza and Teotihuacan contain precise numerical data about planetary orbits and calendar calculations. The distributed nature of this information suggests a deliberate preservation strategy. If crucial knowledge was scattered across multiple monuments on different continents, it would be almost impossible for any single catastrophe to destroy it completely. Even if several sites were lost, enough would survive to allow future civilizations to reconstruct the complete database. But the ancient archivists didn't stop with monuments. They also encoded information in stories, mathematical concepts, and cultural practices that could survive even the complete destruction of physical structures. The stories we call myths often contain precise astronomical data, mathematical relationships, and scientific concepts disguised as narratives about gods and heroes. The Hindu epics, for instance, contain remarkably accurate descriptions of nuclear weapons, aerial warfare, and genetic engineering techniques, all embedded in stories about divine beings and magical powers. The Ramayana describes Vimanas, flying vehicles, with specifications so detailed that modern engineers have used them to design working aircraft. The Mahabharata contains passages about weapons that sound suspiciously like nuclear bombs, complete with descriptions of radiation sickness and environmental contamination. These descriptions are usually dismissed as fantasy or primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena. But what if they represent something else entirely? Technical manuals disguised as religious literature, preserved across thousands of years by cultures that no longer understood the original scientific context. The same pattern appears in traditions around the world. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories contain precise geological information about events that occurred tens of thousands of years ago, including the formation of specific landforms and the effects of sea level changes at the end of the Ice Age. These stories were supposedly created by Stone Age peoples with no understanding of geology, yet they preserve accurate scientific information with remarkable precision. Polynesian creation myths describe the formation of island chains with geological accuracy that matches modern scientific understanding. Norse legends contain detailed descriptions of climate cycles and their effects on human populations. Native American traditions preserve information about astronomical events, geological catastrophes, and environmental changes spanning thousands of years. The consistency and accuracy of this information across so many different cultures suggests that it comes from a common source, a sophisticated understanding of Earth's history and cosmic environment that was systematically preserved in story form when more direct recording methods became unavailable. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this distributed archive is how it seems designed to reveal itself gradually as human knowledge advances. The mathematical constants in the pyramids only became apparent when we developed the tools to measure them precisely. The astronomical alignments of ancient monuments only made sense when we understood precession and long-term celestial mechanics. The scientific information in ancient texts only becomes recognizable when we rediscover the technologies they describe. It's almost as if the ancient archivists anticipated that future civilizations would develop knowledge in a particular sequence, and designed their information storage system to provide confirmation and additional data as we reached each level of understanding. The monuments function like a cosmic combination lock, revealing their secrets only when we demonstrate that we possess the conceptual keys to interpret them correctly. This interpretation explains many of the anomalies that have puzzled researchers for decades. Why do ancient monuments contain information about physical constants that their builders supposedly couldn't have known? Because the builders weren't the original designers. They were reconstructing from plans created by a previous civilization with advanced scientific knowledge. Why do myths from isolated cultures contain such similar descriptions of advanced technologies and cosmic catastrophes? Because they're all fragments of the same original database, preserved in different cultural contexts but ultimately deriving from the same source. Why do ancient astronomical sites commemorate celestial events from thousands of years before they were built? Because they're part of a long-term monitoring system, designed to track cosmic cycles that operate on timescales much longer than individual civilizations. The distributed archive theory also explains why so much ancient knowledge seems to be concentrated in specific locations and cultures. Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, and Mesoamerica weren't just the birthplaces of civilization. They were the designated repository sites where survivors of an earlier global civilization concentrated their efforts to preserve and transmit crucial knowledge. These cultures became the inheritors and guardians of information systems they didn't fully understand, but which they faithfully maintained and transmitted across thousands of years. The priest classes that preserved ancient traditions weren't just religious figures. They were the human components of a vast data storage network, biological hard drives programmed to maintain and transmit information, even when its original purpose was forgotten. This would explain the remarkable continuity of certain traditions across millennia, even through periods of political collapse and cultural upheaval. The essential information was too important to lose, so it was embedded in religious practices, architectural traditions, and cultural rituals that were maintained even when their original scientific context was no longer understood. As our own civilization advances, we're beginning to recognize the sophistication of this ancient information storage system. Modern attempts to preserve knowledge for future civilizations face exactly the same challenges that the ancient archivists did: how to encode essential information in formats that will survive technological collapse, environmental catastrophe, and cultural discontinuity. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault attempts to preserve genetic diversity in a frozen repository designed to survive climate change and political upheaval. The Long Now Foundation is building a 10,000-year clock designed to encourage long-term thinking and preserve information across multiple civilizations. Various projects have proposed encoding human knowledge in crystalline matrices, DNA sequences, and astronomical markers that could survive geological timescales. But all of these modern efforts pale in comparison to the elegance and redundancy of the ancient system. By distributing information across multiple formats, architectural, mythological, mathematical, astronomical, and cultural, the ancient archivists created a storage network that has already survived multiple civilizational collapses and continues to reveal new information as our ability to decode it improves. We are not just uncovering the history of ancient civilizations. We are accessing a vast database of human knowledge that spans hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of years. Each new archaeological discovery, each decoded text, each recognized astronomical alignment adds another piece to a puzzle that reveals not just where we came from, but where we might be heading. The ancient archive is still active, still transmitting its carefully preserved information to anyone with the knowledge and wisdom to decode it. The question is whether we'll prove worthy inheritors of this vast repository of human experience, or whether we will repeat the mistakes that led to its original creator's downfall. The stones are still speaking. The numbers are still adding up. The stars are still marking time in their ancient patterns. And somewhere in the intersection of all this preserved knowledge lies the key to understanding not just our past, but our future, if we can learn to listen before it's too late. The Consciousness Codex. In the sacred cave of Lascaux, 17,000 years beneath the surface of France, ancient artists created something that challenges everything we think we know about the development of human consciousness. The paintings that cover these underground galleries are not primitive scratchings or simple animal portraits. They are sophisticated works of art that demonstrate perspective, movement, shading, and compositional sophistication that rivals anything created in recorded history. But the caves hold secrets that go far beyond artistic technique. Recent analysis has revealed that many of the paintings correspond to star maps, with the positions of animals matching the locations of constellations in the night sky, as they appeared tens of thousands of years ago. The caves function as both art galleries and planetariums, encoding astronomical information in symbolic form that has survived since the end of the Ice Age. Even more mysteriously, the acoustic properties of the caves suggest they were designed to produce specific sound effects. Certain chambers create echoes that enhance particular frequencies, while others produce resonances that can induce altered states of consciousness. The painted areas correspond precisely with the locations that produce the most dramatic acoustic effects, as if the visual and auditory experiences were designed to work together. This combination of visual art, astronomical data, and consciousness, altering sound environments, points towards something far more sophisticated than the shamanic rituals that archaeologists usually invoke to explain cave art. It suggests that Paleolithic humans possessed an understanding of consciousness itself, how it could be modified, enhanced, and used to access information beyond the reach of ordinary perception. This pattern appears at sacred sites around the world. The oracle at Delphi delivered prophecies while in trance states induced by ethylene gas seeping from geological fissures beneath the temple. The design of the chamber amplified these natural psychoactive effects, creating a controlled environment for accessing altered states of consciousness. Recent geological surveys have confirmed that the ancient Greeks positioned their most important oracle precisely over a unique combination of geological features that produced the optimal conditions for consciousness modification. In the Amazon basin, indigenous shamans have used ayahuasca and other plant medicines for thousands of years to access what they describe as plant intelligence, direct communication with the molecular consciousness of the forest. The knowledge they gain through these experiences includes detailed information about the medicinal properties of hundreds of plant species, complex ecological relationships, and sustainable resource management techniques that modern science is only beginning to understand. What's remarkable is that this plant-derived knowledge often proves to be scientifically accurate when tested in modern laboratories. Shamans with no formal training in chemistry or pharmacology somehow know exactly which plants contain specific alkaloids, how to combine them for maximum effectiveness, and how to neutralize dangerous compounds through precise preparation techniques. The conventional explanation is that this knowledge was developed through trial and error over many generations, but the complexity and precision of traditional pharmacology suggests something more sophisticated, a systematic method for accessing information directly from natural systems through altered states of consciousness. This possibility becomes more intriguing when we consider that many of the world's most important scientific discoveries have occurred during altered states of consciousness. Kekule's discovery of the benzene ring came to him in a dream about a snake seizing its own tail. Tesla's alternating current system was revealed to him during a walk while reciting poetry. Einstein's theory of relativity emerged from thought experiments that involved imagining himself riding beams of light. The history of science is filled with examples of breakthrough insights that occurred not through logical analysis, but through intuitive leaps that seem to come from beyond the reach of normal conscious thought. These discoveries often arrived complete and fully formed, requiring only mathematical verification rather than conceptual development. What if this represents not just the quirky psychology of creative genius, but access to a deeper layer of information that exists beyond individual consciousness? What if consciousness itself is not generated by the brain, but is instead something the brain accesses, like a radio receiver tuning into broadcasts from a larger information field? This interpretation is supported by an increasing body of research suggesting that consciousness may not be localized in the brain at all. Studies of near-death experiences, out-of-body phenomena, and remote viewing suggest that consciousness can operate independently of physical brain function. Quantum physics has revealed that information appears to exist at a fundamental level of reality, suggesting that consciousness and information might be different aspects of the same underlying phenomenon. If consciousness functions as a kind of cosmic internet, connecting all living systems to a vast reservoir of information, then the altered states practiced by ancient cultures might represent sophisticated technologies for accessing this network. The cave paintings, the oracle chambers, the plant medicine ceremonies, all of these might be hardware components of an ancient consciousness modification system designed to download information from non-local sources. This would explain many of the anomalies we find in ancient knowledge systems. How did ancient astronomers know about celestial phenomena that couldn't be observed with the naked eye? How did traditional healers discover complex medicinal compounds without modern research methods? How did ancient architects encode mathematical constants that weren't supposed to be discovered for thousands more years? The answer might be that they accessed this information directly through consciousness technologies that we have largely forgotten how to use. The sophisticated practices preserved in mystery schools, shamanic traditions, and esoteric teachings might be the remnants of scientific protocols for consciousness research that were once as systematic and rigorous as modern laboratory methods. Ancient text often describes specific techniques for achieving altered states that sound remarkably like modern consciousness research protocols. The Egyptian Book of the Dead provides detailed instructions for navigating non-ordinary reality. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes precise methods for maintaining awareness during the dissolution of ordinary consciousness. Hindu and Buddhist traditions preserve sophisticated maps of consciousness that catalogue different types of awareness and the techniques for accessing them. These texts weren't religious in the modern sense. They were technical manuals for consciousness exploration, preserved in symbolic language that disguised their scientific content from those who weren't initiated into the proper protocols. The ancient mystery schools that preserved these techniques operated more like research institutions than religious organizations. They required years of training, maintained strict protocols for consciousness modification experiments, and preserved detailed records of their findings. The initiates weren't worshippers, they were consciousness researchers, using systematic methods to explore the nature of reality at levels beyond ordinary perception. What they discovered through these investigations might have included not just information about the natural world, but knowledge about the deep structure of time itself. If consciousness can access information non-locally, it might also be able to access information non-temporally, gathering data from past and future events through some mechanism that transcends ordinary causality. This could explain how ancient cultures possessed knowledge about future astronomical events, future geological catastrophes, and future technological developments. The prophecies preserved in ancient texts might not be supernatural predictions, but scientific reports based on consciousness-based information-gathering techniques. From this perspective, the decline of ancient civilizations might be connected not just to external catastrophes, but to the loss of consciousness technologies that had allowed them to anticipate and prepare for future challenges. When the techniques for accessing non-local information were lost, civilizations became vulnerable to surprises that their predecessors could have foreseen and avoided. Our own civilization might be approaching a similar crossroads. We have developed powerful technologies for manipulating the external world, but we have largely abandoned the exploration of consciousness itself. We can split atoms and sequence genomes, but we have little systematic understanding of how consciousness operates, or how it might be enhanced to access broader ranges of information. Meanwhile, the challenges we face, climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, technological risks, might require exactly the kind of long-term perspective and systemic understanding that consciousness-based information gathering could provide. We might need to rediscover and modernize the ancient consciousness technologies if we want to navigate successfully through the dangerous period ahead. The good news is that the knowledge hasn't been completely lost. Indigenous traditions around the world still preserve consciousness modification techniques that could be studied and developed using modern scientific methods. Psychedelic research is beginning to reveal the neural mechanisms underlying altered states, while quantum physics provides theoretical frameworks for understanding how consciousness might access non-local information. What we need now is the wisdom to recognize that consciousness itself might be the most important technology we can develop, not just for understanding the past, but for creating a sustainable future. The ancient consciousness codex is still accessible to anyone willing to undertake the training and research necessary to decode it. The cave painters of Lascaux might have been trying to tell us something crucial about the nature of consciousness and its role in human survival. Their message, encoded in pigment and stone and carefully designed acoustic chambers, might still be waiting for us to develop the proper protocols for receiving it. In the darkness of those ancient caves, surrounded by star maps painted by Paleolithic astronomers, we might finally understand what our ancestors were trying to preserve. Not just information about the external world, but techniques for expanding consciousness itself to embrace the full spectrum of available knowledge. The question now is whether we have the courage and wisdom to pick up where they left off, before the window of opportunity closes and we lose access to the consciousness codex forever. In the end, we circle back to where we began, to the stories told around fires, to the myths that refuse to die, to the whispers of deep memory that insist we have been here before. But now, having followed the evidence through stone and bone, through DNA and disaster, through the depths of oceans and the heights of mountains, the whispers have become something else. They have become a chorus, a symphony of clues that harmonize into a single haunting melody. The song of return, the eternal rhythm of rise and fall that beats like a heart through the deep time of our planet. We are not the first, we may not be the last, but we are here now, in this moment between forgetting and remembering, between the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next. We stand at the same crossroads that every previous civilization has faced, carrying the same gifts and curses that led them to greatness and to ruin. The evidence we have gathered does not prove that advanced civilizations existed in the deep past, but it suggests, no, it insists, that the possibility cannot be dismissed. Too many anomalies align, too many patterns repeat, too many voices across too many cultures tell variations of the same story for it all to be coincidence or wishful thinking. The megaliths that stretch across continents like the remnants of some vast construction project. The genetic bottlenecks that record near extinctions followed by mysterious recoveries. The flood myths that remember the same catastrophe from 1,000 different perspectives. The technologies that appear and disappear and reappear as if drawn from some common well of knowledge that periodically runs dry and is then rediscovered. The myths were trying to tell us something important, that human history is not a straight line from primitive to sophisticated, from ignorant to enlightened, from weak to powerful. It is a spiral, a series of cycles that repeat but never exactly, each one building on the ruins of the last while adding something new to the mix. We have been farmers before, and we forgot how to grow food and had to learn again. We have been builders before, and we forgot how to cut stone and had to rediscover the techniques. We have been astronomers before, mapping the movements of the stars, only to lose the knowledge and have to relearn that we live in a vast cosmos that cares nothing for our small ambitions. And we have been destroyers before. We have poisoned our environment, depleted our resources, turned our technologies against each other in wars that left nothing but ash and radiation, and the slow, patient work of healing that takes generations to complete. We have risen to heights that touch the sky and fallen to depths that nearly ended our story entirely. The difference this time, the thing that makes our moment in history unique, is that we are beginning to remember. We have developed the tools to read the genetic record, to decode the stories written in stone, to map the ocean floors where the ruins of previous worlds might lie hidden. We are learning to recognize the signatures of past civilizations, the subtle traces they left in ice cores and isotope ratios, in impact craters and mass extinctions. For the first time in human history, we have the possibility of learning from the mistakes of our predecessors. We can see the warning signs they missed, understand the forces that brought them down, recognize the patterns that repeat across the cycles of rise and fall. We can choose to be different, to break the cycle, to create something that lasts beyond the next catastrophe. But only if we listen to the warnings the evidence provides, only if we pay attention to the whispers of deep memory that tell us what we once were and what we might become again. Only if we remember that we are not the culmination of history, but part of an ongoing story that began long before us and will continue long after we are gone. The stones remember, the genes remember, the myths remember, and now finally we're beginning to remember too. The question is, what will we do with that memory? Will we use it to avoid the mistakes of the past, or will we repeat them as every previous civilization has done? The Earth is patient. It has watched civilizations rise and fall before. It will watch again, recording everything in its slow, careful script of stone and ice and bone. It will remember us as it has remembered all the others long after our cities have crumbled.